Welcome back to the 2-Minute Warning today. Back on the topic of the NFL. A lot of questioning going on with Julio Jones, the Atlanta Falcons. I guess Falcons GM said they would be open to a Julio Jones trade. Of course, there's a price for anybody. So that's what we're going to talk about today, but more specifically with the LA Chargers and whether or not they should make a trade for Julio Jones. I think him with the Chargers would obviously change that team for the better, hopefully for the better. But before we get into this video, question today, and that is, do you guys think Julio Jones is worth a first rounder or not? He's 32 years old. He's coming off of 2 straight years where he's dealt with injuries. So that's obviously a question. So again, comment below whether or not you think he's worth a first rounder. At the end of the video, you'll hear Jay and I's opinion. But Jay, do you think the Chargers make a trade for Julio Jones?
It all depends on the price. If it comes down to, I guess it's not up to us what do we think it's worth. It's up to the Falcons. What do they want in return? And there's already been some cap situations with the Falcons. Supposedly, if they trade Julio Jones after June 1st, they save $15 million against the cap. But if they trade him before the June 1st and there's a trade having to do with this draft, it is a $23 million cap hit. So clearly there's a much bigger incentive to trade him after the draft. And we're possibly looking at a trade that would have to do with 2022 NFL draft picks. But to think of it just this year, if Julio Jones was on the trade block for a first rounder, I don't see any way the Chargers should even consider giving up 13 overall. There's already assumptions, what if the Chargers went with a receiver in the draft into Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle? And a lot of Chargers fans and just NFL fans don't think that's a good idea. Yes, that helped the receiving core, but currently today the Chargers have a lot more needs. Left tackle, cornerback, a pass rusher. A Penei Sewell or a J.C. Horn or a Christian Darrisaw or Kwity Paye would suit this team a lot more than a receiver such as Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle. So why would you make a Julio Jones kind of draft pick? Because that's what you'd be substituting the 13th pick for. So to me, it depends on the price. If you could get him for a second or third round pick, assuming this is in 2022, I'm 100% jumping on it. This Chargers team, just thinking about Julio Jones, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams all being on the same team with a type of quarterback with Justin Herbert. All those guys are 6'2". They're all go up and get it guys. There's no way any defense can prepare for that and 100% lock it down. And to me, it just depends on the price. I do think it's at least worth making a phone call and seeing what he's going to cost. But I do think the Falcons are going to want too much. Just the Chargers aren't in a situation to give up for Julio now. They have a lot more needs.
Yeah, that is interesting. You bring up what the Falcons are going to want for Julio Jones. Like I said, he's over 30, coming off 2 injuries, 2 seasons where he had injuries. But he really is kind of the image of the Falcons, really. You think of Julio Jones. He's been there for his whole career. They're obviously not a great team. At least certainly weren't last year. But they had a number 8 ranked. I just looked it up. In an 8 ranked offense, really not as bad as you think. They put up a lot of points. They don't have really any defensive.
They lost in shootouts.
Right, they lost in shootouts in a season where Julio Jones, like I said, 8th ranked offense. He only played 5 games. So I think my point is Julio Jones is still really important to this offense. So they're going to want a lot for him. This Falcons team is missing defensive playmakers, and I think that they have a good draft, which I guess their first rounder likely be Kyle Pitts at this point. But if they have a good draft, and I don't know, I just think that they are not as bad as they may look record-wise. They're just a few defensive players away from being a good team. So, again, my whole point of saying this is that they're going to want a lot for Julio Jones because he's super important to this team. As far as the Chargers, you said it already. They don't need a receiver so bad that I just don't think it's going to work out perfectly because the Falcons are going to want a lot for him, and then the Chargers are not going to want him that bad. As far as giving up draft capital, I guess that's kind of the question today. Is he worth a first rounder? It's a good question. I personally think he is, but it would certainly be a risk. And I think you certainly don't want to move off of or include a trade with Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, but other receivers, Tyron Johnson or Jalen Guyton, or possibly you could trade them if the Falcons want one of those guys in the trade. Falcons do have a receiving core with Calvin Ridley right now, and then like I said with the draft, you pick up Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, and included Jalen Guyton for example. That's still not a bad receiving core. Mm-hmm. So the Falcons could make work with the trade, but like Jay said, I think that between what the Falcons are going to want for him, because Julio is so important to that franchise, and what the Chargers would be willing to give up, I don't think it'll quite work out.
Yeah, and I think the draft will have a big impact as well. What will the Chargers get in the draft? Will they need him at this point? Will they get a 4th rounder diamond in the rough or a 3rd rounder diamond in the rough like Chase Claypool to the Steelers, where it's not even in question anymore? Or also, if the Falcons say at number 4 overall they trade with Denver at number 9, and in return they got Denver's first round pick in 2022, the Falcons might be looking at 2022 and say, we already have our own first rounder, we already have the Denver Broncos first rounder, let's try and get a third first rounder for Julio Jones. They might want to stack up on picks. So if they get a trade in this draft, I think they'll be looking to create more trades and create an insane amount of draft capital for 2022. And I just think, given what Julio, he is a question mark, but what he's done, I think he's worth a late first-round pick, in my opinion. A number 13 overall Chargers first-round pick, that's a little high. But if I'm like a Baltimore Ravens, who I have now number 31 overall, that is worth going for. And, of course, a Julio Jones trade right now, I think you need to trade him to a team, or he should be traded to a team that's really one piece away. Maybe a Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, maybe a New England Patriots if they could figure out their quarterback, maybe a San Francisco 49ers. We know they're willing to give up picks in 4 future years. To me, that he needs to go to a team that's one piece away. And while I like the Chargers long term, they have too many holes right now, and their receiver is not one.
And we failed to mention, I guess, a big thing about the whole trade. June 1st is the deadline. The Falcons trade him after that. They'll be saving themselves roughly $15 million. And if they trade him before that, then it will be like cap hit of about the same $15 million. So this trade is likely going to depend on what happens in the draft, and it'll be likely after June 1st. I think a lot, you mentioned possibly the Falcons, say, you proposed the example with Denver, they trade back. I think a big factor in this trade would be whether or not the Falcons draft Kyle Pitts, because say they don't, then your offensive, your weapons are totally different. It's Calvin Ridley, it's Julio Jones. So you don't want to move off of Julio Jones unless you have a Kyle Pitts who knows could be the next Julio Jones of the league. I mean, he's physically just about the same size and ability, at least in the college level. So my point is, if they draft Kyle Pitts, then that does, I guess, lower Julio Jones' value because they could do without him more. But if the Falcons trade back in the draft and don't pick up Kyle Pitts, then his value is going way up, and then the Chargers are going to be really out of the picture.
Yeah, there's a fair point, because it's arguable that a lot of people don't have Kyle Pitts labeled as a tight end. They just have him labeled as an offensive weapon.
And with his 4.44 40 time, which unofficial.
Yeah, supposedly 4.4.
Every single receiver is running sub 4.5. Yeah. Every player was running sub 4.5.
Yeah, I'm going to say he's 4.5, 4.6, just to be safe. Let's just giving him the benefit of the doubt. Say he runs a 4.4. He's bigger than Julio. He's 6'6". Julio's probably 6'3", 6'4". Still a big dude. But, I mean, Kyle Pitts, he's being compared to Megatron. And while I love Julio Jones, I'm going to take Calvin Johnson over Julio Jones. And I do think they're on a similar par. But if Kyle Pitts really is the next best thing, you can move on from Julio Jones. And like you said, that could hurt his value because he's not as needed more in Atlanta. But that could also open up the amount of teams looking to trade for Julio, and then that raises the price because of the amount of competition. So there are a lot of variables to consider. But like I said, the Chargers don't need him, but I can't wrap my head around passing on having Julio Jones, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams all on the same team. And of course, there's still other guys, maybe a Donald Parham who's 6'8", and he's emerging, and Austin Eckler out of the backfield, Jared Cook. I don't know if you'll have these guys in the following year because we don't know when Julio will be traded, but assuming he would be for this season, this is a type of player that would really give the Chargers a chance to take down the Chiefs. Right now we have them like they'll probably make a wild card spot this year, but if they really want to go toe-to-toe and make a run at that division, a Julio Jones type of X-Factor player is going to give you that chance. And we have to remember, I think people forget how good Julio Jones is. When healthy, the dude's a top 5 receiver in the NFL. And if you get any player at any position and they're top 5 at that position in the NFL, it's going to change your team for the better and give you a serious threat at any team. And I do think this could be a serious type of player that could give you a chance at a division title.
Yeah, for sure. I do think, we talked about this kind of before, I think there's 2 years left on Julio's contract with the Falcons. So potentially a trade would be for short term in LA, assuming that would mean that the Chargers would expect to be a Julio Jones away from going all the way, and of course re-signing him is an option. But my point being is he should go to a team, or he likely will go to a team that is ready to win, just needs his help. I think the Chargers need a little bit more than that. They got to address the left tackle, which they hopefully will do in the draft. I think they could use a linebacker before they could use Julio Jones. Hell, for me, I think they could use a running back because I'm not a huge fan of Austin Eckler. But all in all, I guess the Chargers have bigger priorities and likely not necessarily not the budget, but they're not going to be willing to give up enough that the Falcons want, I don't think.
Yeah, and there's rumors that the Chargers could trade up for Penei Sewell, and if they do that, that's not a bad move by any means, but you're forfeiting future draft capital, which you'd have to
probably use to get
Julio Jones. So it's kind of a catch-22, whatever you want to call it. It is a weird spot, but say the Chargers fall into a spot where they draft Christian Darrisaw, and he's still a great left tackle, and you get an Asante Samuel Jr., probably the 4th or 5th best corner in this draft in the 2nd round. You got a good corner, you got a left tackle, your major holes are filled. Giving up a 2022 2nd-round pick or 3rd-round pick is what you need to make a run at the Chiefs in the very following year, and I do think it's at least worth considering, but draft day will determine pretty much everything for my final opinion.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess final verdict is a Chargers trade for Julio is probably unlikely, but the thought of having Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Julio Jones is pretty awesome from a Chargers perspective. That's all for the video, guys. Jay, question of the day, do you think he's worth a first-rounder?
If you're a team that's one piece away and you have a late first-round pick, I think it's worth it. But if you're a team that has a very high first-round pick, it's a pretty good chance. If you have a super high first-round pick, it's not just a receiver you're missing. You're probably not a good team. But late first-round pick, 100% for me, but early, not so much.
Yeah, Julio Jones is 32. He's injury-prone the last couple of years, but I still think he's worth that first-rounder. But, yes, a late one. Theoretically, from the Chargers' point of view, we said they'd win 13 games this year. If they pull that off, you're looking at probably a 25 or later pick. Yeah. So, from the Chargers' perspective, he may be worth a 2021 first-round pick. But, yes, a late first-rounder is as far as I'd go for Julio Jones. He's still Julio Jones, but he is over 30, and he is getting injured recently. So, that's all for the video, guys. Thanks for watching. 2-minute warning.